Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Welcome to SaaS Connect Online. I'm Swaroop Kali, founder and CEO of Pronto, your host. And for those of you who haven't heard of Pronto, Pronto is a partner ecosystem management platform that fundamentally is used to manage the entire end-to-end life cycle of partnerships, with our mission being really helping organizations grow, build, and manage their indirect lines of businesses with the same level of rigor as their direct lines of businesses. Right? Today we have Shreyas Sadalgi, the Chief Business Strategy Officer for BetterCloud, and we are going to talk about a very interesting topic, which is about overcoming hurdles in SaaS ecosystem partnerships, and lessons and strategies from Shreyas's experience. Just a quick reminder, you can ask questions, and please make this a very lively, interactive conversation. You can get your questions throughout the talk. There is the Q&A section below. Please fire away your questions there. And one thing that I'm actually very excited about that Shreyas and I were just talking about is the fact that the conferences are starting to happen in person, and I'm really looking forward to seeing some of you, if not all of you, at the Cloud Software Association SaaS Connect conference that's coming up. Don't forget to register. It's on the 27th of April. You can find the registration links at cloudsoftwareassociation.com. Having said that, let's kick this off. Shreyas, can you introduce yourself to the audience here?
Yeah, first off, thank you for having me here, Swaroop, and hello to everybody. Good morning, good afternoon to wherever you are. First off, I got a first dose of that in-person interaction at a conference last week. We attended our first conference as part of BetterCloud, being a sponsor, and it was just energizing. And so can't wait for the season of conferences to open up. So to introduce myself, for those of you who are not familiar with BetterCloud, we are actually a leader in the SaaS Ops category, stands for SaaS Operations. And we've been leading the charge for SaaS ecosystems in terms of integrations and value to IT and security professionals. And so for me as personally, is what my role in the company has been is leading all of our partnerships and the business strategy for the company from a corp dev and corp strategy focus. So it's a pretty unusual title that is given to a person with this charter. So I want to give you a quick anecdote, right? So it's been 5.5 years since I've been at BetterCloud, and our CEO and myself were debating, like, hey, what should the role and this charter and the name for this title and this person be? And it had to incorporate all of the aspects that I just talked about, and this is the best that we could do to do justice to it. And I thought of it as like, hey, what's the acronym? Like, what's this? This is a CBSO or Chief BS Officer. I'm like, Chief BS Officer sounds really good, so sign me up, right? And he had me at hello there. So that's just the background of my time at BetterCloud. But yeah, I've spent the last 15 years building ecosystems of partnerships, primarily around product and technology integration that lead to good go-to-market outcomes and a big impact for the company. So that's just me. And we can talk about BetterCloud in a bit, but hopefully that's a good intro for you and for the rest of the crew here. So
sounds good. Thanks, Shreyas. And I think that's a good segue into one of the first questions that I've been noodling on for a while now, and you're fairly aware of the question. So, Shreyas, so aside from the brand recognition that you get when you're partnering with globally recognized companies, right? And in the case of BetterCloud, Dropbox, Okta, VMware. What's the best way to think about sort of some of the gives and gets that an organization should expect when you're building some of these partnerships? Again, I think all of us are too familiar with how limited resources can be from a partnerships team standpoint. Like the teams are relatively smaller than other teams, right? So what should leaders know going into some of these partnerships so that they can allocate the time and budget effectively?
Yeah, good question, and I'm sure that's top of mind for a lot of folks. It is always top of mind for us as we build and evolve and also like build expectations and look at outcomes from partnerships, right? So I think a good way to get into that is to explain to folks like, how we've been like, what is BetterCloud about, right? It's all about this category called SaaS Ops that we've been leading for a while. And I think it's essential to this topic, right? If you want to build a SaaS ecosystem, it's best to understand from the lens of like a business that is all about SaaS, right? So we have been carrying the flag for like SaaS democratization for the last decade. And we've done that from the lens of enabling IT and security teams to make sure that every SaaS application that they deploy is like ubiquitously used by employees across the organization. From what we've heard is like this term called wall-to-wall SaaS adoption by every employee across every org, right? And so we've been leading this charter, and this category is called SaaS Operations. And for those of you who are not familiar with like what is SaaS Ops, it basically unifies these three functions for IT teams, and it really stands for SaaS Operations. And we're doing this from a zero-touch perspective, right? Where it's about like getting deep insights into what applications, what SaaS apps users, our employees are using, like, how do you then optimize that life cycle, and then how do you protect the data inside those SaaS apps? Now, I give you this overview because this helps you understand the kind of the massive ecosystem of SaaS vendors that we get to interact with, all the way from building the integrations, launching those integrations from a technology like evolution and technology partnerships, and finally getting some outcomes, right? And so back to your question in terms of the gives and gets, right? We think of the gives and gets from a variety of lenses, right? And this is a good generic way. Like even if you take yourself outside of a kind of a profile of a company like BetterCloud, but you're in the SaaS ecosystem, you're looking to partner with other SaaS vendors, how should you go about it, right? Like what's the good way to kind of look at it from both the other company's lens and you as a business in the SaaS space, right? That lens. So like this box on the left, right? That's where it starts from, right? That's where everything starts from, is the technology integration value, right? So is there value for the other SaaS company and you as another SaaS company, and most importantly, our mutual customers, by increasing the product capabilities and filling each other's gaps? But ultimately that outcome, the third outcome that I put in there, which is about increasing customer retention, right? And this is a thing that's now happening called integration-led growth. What I mean by this is that a technology integration between two SaaS platforms, should increase the retention, satisfaction, and the stickiness within that SaaS application for that customer. And in turn, it should be a win-win for both your companies to retain that customer, but also grow the usage of your product and across the portfolio of products that a SaaS company has, right? So it starts from there first. And that's the first set of boxes that we believe should be checked to lead to the rest of these other boxes, right? Because if you check that box, then you go to the next box, which is growing the category and brand awareness, which, like you said, like every company feels like that is the best outcome that you want to do, is to associate yourself with a bigger SaaS company and have co-branding. That might look like really artificial at a surface level if you don't do it correctly without that first box of technology integration value. And that's why I stress the importance of that. That sort of sets the caliber, right, for like, or the low bar, right, for what it is that you want the joint value proposition to come across from a co-branding perspective, right? That's an obvious thing in terms of increasing brand awareness, growing your TAM, category creation efforts for both the companies, but then there has to be a good foundation. And then you go into this thing called generating top of the funnel. What we mean by that is like, okay, this is the outcome. This is the first type of outcome that you can expect after having to put in the work for the integration, the brand awareness, because that's really where it starts to matter, right? For the business, right? Saying, okay, how can you start to expect outcomes? Well, the first outcome is that it has to start to generate a good top of the funnel that you're not already seeing through this SaaS partnership. And that could come in a variety of ways, right? Like acquiring customer lists, or even if you have a customer list, getting new contacts within that customer organization through the other SaaS partner company. Generating, classic, marketing qualified leads with co-marketing campaigns, improving prospecting efficiency, because now you have sort of a unfair advantage of having a back channel to the customer, to another SaaS vendor in the relationship. And the ultimate way to measure that is the sourced leads and opportunities and outcomes for that top of the funnel. So I covered that first layer on top. So I've said a lot. Let me just pause and see if you have any comments or feedback or questions, but I can keep going to the bottom layer as well.
Yeah, keep going. You're on the roll, Shreyas. I'm taking copious notes here.
All right. Yeah, great. So then if you look at the acceleration in the middle at the bottom of the funnel, so I'm just like going into the logical next steps of like how the life cycle of a new prospect opportunity kind of follows, right? Well, yeah, it goes into the middle and bottom of the funnel. What we mean here is that, let's say if we're not able to generate top of the funnel, right, with a partnership, because again, different companies bring different value. But let's say there's a big gap that you have saying, hey, like, how can we at least have the other SaaS company be an advocate behind the scenes for you as a company, but in the aid of your sales process, right? And that's what we mean by third-party advocacy and influencing the sales and buying process. There's a term that we are familiar in the partner ecosystem called as influenced revenue, or influenced business, right? So that's really that category there, which is like, how can you share insights and really, like, again, with the litmus test, say, hey, did this partner really influence the sales process, and answer that with a pretty binary outcome, right? So that's, if the answer is yes, then that's a big impact that you can measure in terms of the middle and bottom of the funnel. And then the other like gives and gets that a typical SaaS company can look for is, hey, look, you may be only a North American business, or maybe an Asian business, or like a European business, but if you want to go across the so-called ponds and the oceans, then how do you like do that without burning your own like fuel, right? Your own rocket fuel. And that's really what we mean by geographic coverage and distribution through that partner. Look, it could happen through, typical way to think about it is like it happens through a distribution like vendor, or like some kind of a like reseller that happens ecosystem, right? That's kind of funneled off from a distribution vendor. But what we've seen is like if you set up partnerships like wisely, then you can actually do a divide and conquer approach, where you can take care of the business that you're good at in the geography, but you give the rights to the other SaaS company to say, hey, like, you already have a field team and a massive distribution engine already set up. So how can you actually leverage that for localized selling in that region? So that's another way to think about the gives and gets. And finally, the greenfield markets. And this is something that's really important if you have a disciplined focus on like, hey, what is your ideal customer profile that you define, right? And then that can then determine, well, if you want to expand into another ideal customer profile, or you want to go into another product category, right? And these partnerships could be ways to sort of test the waters or dip your toes by expanding into either the market segment of a different customer segment, or a new product category, right? And that's where partnerships can really work really well, right? Because if there's a good give and get there, and there's a good clear set of expectations, because the biggest thing, honestly, that's top of mind for many partnerships is like, how do you avoid channel conflict or just conflict of interest, right? And this is where this aspect comes in. So I would advocate for like all of these to be evaluated really well in terms of gives and gets, and this would lead to successful SaaS ecosystems.
So I got a couple of questions there, Shreyas. So in that entire slide where you have about 6 boxes, and you have several sort of subcategories, or I would say sub-parameters, right? Like for you to think about gives and gets, right? Most of the times what happens with partnerships is, especially when you're partnering with a bigger company, you sort of have to like prove yourself worthy of their interest to be able to collaborating with you from a go-to-market standpoint, right? And it always becomes sort of a chicken and egg problem, where are you going to bring me a customer or a prospect first before I lean towards you? And as a smaller company, you're always looking at the bigger company. And yes, there's great integration value. Customers are loving this. Obviously, the brand perception has increased because you've sort of punched above your weight and built a partnership with a bigger company. Like, how do you resolve this chicken and egg problem, right? Like, do you deliver value first from a go-to-market standpoint to them, and sort of pull them in and make them lean in? Like, what are your recommendations or suggestions there?
Yeah, I mean, there's again, we think of it as from a different framework, and this is hopefully applicable to other partners and vendors here who are listening in. Let me again bring up a slide here or two to talk about it, right? So it's like we think of, again, it has to start with a good foundation of a technology integration, right? And then, like you said, like let's go win some lighthouse accounts together, with or without the partnerships, like actually the partnership actually helping or aiding that. That's more like, it's almost like a betas, right, that you run for the partnership, a beta program. But in reality, you're actually getting customers to validate that, right? And then that plays into the brand recognition and everything else. So that's sort of the first and second phases, right? If you do that correctly, it could be in a small region, right? Let's say you just only pick the East Coast or a sub region of the East Coast or the West Coast. I would say do that really well for is like crawl, walk, run approach, right? Just do it well for a region versus like trying to expand all to all national teams or international teams. That's what we've seen that really works. And then that starts to create the kind of buy-in from the groundswell effect, right? Because the phenomenon of what you're saying is like, yeah, if you go top down, you can shake hands at the highest ranks at the executive level and say, hey, let's go partner. But the groundswell happens, I believe, from a bottoms up perspective, right? And this is where the bottoms up magic starts to happen, right? Because the co-selling, you do that with a small team, like using all the incentives, and that's then leads to the other set of like the sort of art of the possible, right? You could start to go to deeper motions like reselling or embedding into the other partner's product. And this is why, like, looking at both technology success and customer success and validating that with the co-brand and the co-marketing success will lead to the next phases.
Got it. Got it. So let me ask you a like sort of follow-on question associated with this, right? Like, look, I think all of us now agree that, you know, you need to sort of choose who you partner with very wisely. And I think what you've shared as sort of the gives and gets, I think once you have the first matrix of, hey, this is what I'm able to offer to the partner, bigger or smaller, and this is what I'm anticipating to get in return, right? It's a relationship that you're building with another company, right? Now, especially when they become like deep strategic alliances, like some of your relationships that you have, you know, they do require a lot of commitment, right? Like you need resources, you need investments, you need to really hammer some things down. So how long does it take typically for you, like from an initial conversation to like really getting to signing or executing a partner agreement? Because that involves redlining as well, which we all know is very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and then we don't want to exhaust or take precious cycles from our respective legal teams to do all the redlining for no good outcomes. Yeah, that's a good question. And so, look, I think the amount of time that it takes for investment or like to expect outcomes could really vary based on the type of partnership that you're going into, right? And I'll talk about like the different categories of partners of how to think about it. But I think the premise to that is going to be, what is the again, what is the expected outcome, right? If it's like to validate the go-to-market success through mutual customer adoption, there's a set of plays you run, and you can expect like maybe 3 to 4 quarters for that to play out, right? That's a good framework there. But if the expectation is more of a long-term play, right? Like, hey, look, this is more about creating product and market adjacencies for both our companies, then you have to give it like a good, like a year or two to do that sometimes. But on the flip side, it could be more of a flash in the pan thing, right? Where like you want to see a quick outcome in a quarter, but not really put a lot of like formalization into the partnership, but just say, hey, let's go like give this to our mutual channel partners to have them create the demand and sell it together, versus us two software companies having to exhaust, you know, all the resources from legalization or like formalization of the partnership, or like even expanding the efforts between our field sales teams, right? So I think depending on those outcomes, right, and depending on how the companies are set up in terms of the field sales teams, is it more like, does it have a channel aspect or not? Is it direct sales? that actually typically varies. And I can give you some examples of like some frameworks, right? Of like so the audience gets a feel for like what does that look like typically. Let's say you want to do a go-to-market play with two companies who are focused on direct sales models and not from a channel model, right? So this is something that we've seen work really well, where you put that in two buckets, right? One is an enablement in terms of like how do you activate the partnership by with the launch activities and making sure that both the field teams are fully enabled in terms of what is the solution, what is the joint integration, what's the value, right? What's the Wi-Fi, I say, like what's in it for you to take it to your customers, right? So all the activities on the left, which some of you may be familiar with, is typically something that I would suggest and advise that you would do. That then leads to, okay, great. If you do that really well, then what are the go-to-market activities that you can start to execute if that works well, right? Some good practices are like you map accounts, but then you have shared Slack channels and the good incentives, and start to do small regional events like I had suggested, right? And a good way to test that is go to the customer conferences of those SaaS vendors, right? So that's a great way to validate the partnership, and not just with the customer, but also then in front of that other SaaS company saying, hey, look, this is happening in front of your quote unquote eyes. And so this is a good way to say, wow, okay, this is actually being appreciated by the customer, by our mutual customers, right? And have some top performer contests, right? We did this thing where we actually gave away we co-branded a surfboard for between two companies, and we basically gave that as a good giveaway for the best AE on the other partner's side, who had the most number of leads generated, but also closed business, right? And that became a thing that company rallied behind, saying, geez, I want to win that surfboard. Whether I surf with it or not, it becomes an accolade in my office, right? So that actually worked really well for us. And so I would say that this is what you can expect, right? And a good like the audience might be thinking, okay, how does the what is a good case study or example of like what enablement here looks like, right? And what is the kind of like a good example of if it's done correctly, right? How does it look like? And this is something that we mentioned in the title of the webinar. Like we've done a good job as a company at BetterCloud to have launched a great partnership with Okta like 3 to 4 years ago. And this is all the kind of things that led to it, right? We had a great way to brand this on Okta's website in terms of our joint value proposition. We were able to get some real estate on their blogs to do this on the day of the launch, create a video and show up at their annual customer conference called Octane. Like this playbook really worked when we actually launched our Okta partnership, and we had a great partnership over the next 18 months of the launch.
So I think you started hinting about a little bit around the go-to-market side of things, right? More from an enablement standpoint and actually operationalizing the go-to-market side of things. I think you started hinting at that, right? But look, you have the partnership, you signed off the agreement. Sometimes integrations could be built before the agreement is done. Sometimes they could be done after an agreement is done, because you really need access to sandbox environment, and complex integrations need investments from solutions architects, especially from the partners end, if they're complex integrations or bundles that you have to build, right? But like, where should companies get started when they start thinking about a go-to-market strategy, right? Like, what does a typical go-to-market journey with a partner look like? I think resell is pretty straightforward, but in all other scenarios, especially with SaaS partnerships, like what does the typical go-to-market journey look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's two things to unpack there, right? So one is like, what is the natural evolution of if you do the co-sell correctly and it leads to the next phase, sort of phase of the partnership, that could lead to more deeper formalization of like, okay, great, this is something that both companies really want, and let's go to the next step. There's one thing there. And the other thing is like, well, for both those phases, right, whether it's the co-sell phase or the deep technology resale through the software vendor versus the channel partner, what is sort of the life cycle of activities, right? So let's talk about the first one, right? So the first one, going back to like if like take that example of Okta, but let's say if that were to go really well, and if a company like Okta or something, some other company were to like say, okay, this really makes sense. Let's have this on our price list, so to speak, and have this to be formalized where all of our field reps get quota relief, commission, and it acts as a sell-through model, right? And that is the dream for any partnership, is it evolves from a sell-with model to a sell-through model. That there's plenty of examples that have been executed there, right? So I would say that is a good aspiration for a partnership to go to that next level. And a good example of that, I'll share an example here, is how we achieved that with Dropbox, right? Again, that is a great partnership that will start with the co-sale motion. We did a really good job of that, and then Dropbox was convinced that, hey, we should put this BetterCloud product on our price list. But we came with a very creative commercial model where, okay, it's a skinny down version of BetterCloud, but only for Dropbox, that one SaaS integration. And you can see how that looked like, right? That looked like essentially a way that is felt like a Dropbox product. It's an add-on to their core product, but it ultimately powered by BetterCloud, right? So that's one way to look at it. And then an extreme other way is like, well, if you go and you were able to go to the next step and say, hey, like this is something that took many years and it becomes an OEM, that's the next evolution of the partnership, right? And so with all these aspects, and that's why I want to show this one first, where like this is the framework that any SaaS company should look at, right? Where the channel is pretty obvious, right? That's like reselling and expanding your reach. But the two flavors of like go-to-market technology partners, like one is the go-to-market technology partners in the middle is where what you said is all co-marketing, co-selling, it's not formalized. But if it can evolve to the next phase where it goes from sell with to sell through, then it goes to the left box here in terms of what we think of it as a strategic alliance or a partnership, where it really becomes like more of a predictable business model and a business outcome, right, from that partnership. And that's how I believe SaaS companies can look at ecosystems. And regardless of like what flavor it takes in terms of a strategic partnership or just a go-to-market, co-sell, co-market partnership, the types of activities, right? The types of activities are really like they're life cycle. This is how we think about it, right? Starts from, this is the playbook that we have here, which starts from the build of the partnership, then goes into the operation of the partnership, and then you continuously evolve the technology integration and start to add more value if steps 1 and 2 actually get the right outcomes, right? And so like the left part is more about like you're working on the partnership to bring value, bring to market the whole product integration. The right part is monetizing from that partnership, right? And within these steps, these are the types of activities. I think this is the second question that you asked, which is like, what are the types of activities that companies should expect, right? There's a lot, like just one back here, right? In the first phase of the build, there's a whole bunch of technology agreements and go-to-market agreements that you may or may not want to sign, right? But the least you need to do is to build integration and start to test that with the launch and adoption, like we talked about. And so after you go to the second part, which is on the right side, the enablement, the commercial engagement, right? You're mapping accounts, you're doing all the co-selling, the co-marketing, and then you come back to going to evolve that by taking feedback from the solutions engineering teams on both sides and say, hey, what have we heard from customers from the feedback from sort of the V1 or the version 1 of the partnership integration, and then you evolve that, right, with more feedback and convinced that it's actually needs more nurturing. But this is why it's like a cyclical effect, right? And you constantly have to feed the different elements of the partnership to start to look at the different outcomes. And so this is how we think about it.
Got it. So this was all amazing information, Shreyas. I'm glad our audience is getting to see sort of how the sausage is made and at a very tactical level. So this is great. Thank you so much. So look, this is all that information that will help a lot of companies hit the ground running, right? Now, But if you sort of think about, again, going back to the whole topic about, sort of how do you overcome these hurdles? We've initially talked about, hey, the value that you should always think about. What is the value that customers get? What is the value that I'm getting? What is the value that our partners are going to get? And that's where the gives and gets comes into, right? And and again, I've done this in the past, or you have done this obviously for a long time, and you have these list of partners who sort of fit that criteria of that gives and gets, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, it's not like every potential partner is going to be always on the topmost list. I mean, like there's always sort of the best in class tier one versus someone which is probably easier for you to partner with, but might not derive the same value out of a potential relationship, at least in the short term, if not in the long term, right? But how do you categorize, right? You have this list of partners, you want to go after some categories or some tiers of partners first. So how do you categorize some of these partners into different stages of a relationship?
Yeah, happy to talk and expand more about that. And so we do that. We actually have an annual planning process to do that, to evolve that and to inspect and and to kind of look at what's working and what's not working, and then we constantly evolve that. But happy to share some thoughts here, right? So this is a good way of how you can start to think of prioritizing and coming up with like what is the partner strategy, right? So we go through this annually and start from the boxes on the top left all the way to the bottom right, and the purposely kind of like the different gradients of colors, right? Where you have to first define your ideal partner profile based on all the things that we just talked about, right? Like, okay, which partner satisfies the criteria that you want to accomplish? Then you look at prior year's performance for either that partnership has been set up or not. And then what are your expectations in line with the business, right? What does the business want to get out of you as the partnership's org, so to speak? And then that then leads us to the definitions of the partner stages, which I'll talk about. And then you have to come up with the onboarding plan to go recruit and hunt and essentially like onboard those partners. That could involve channel partners and reseller partners, as well as technology partners. And then ultimately you come up with the partner readiness, right? If you go through that process, which is like, are we ready as a company to recruit and have those partners be onboarded, and vice versa? Is that partner ready based on their like state of the kind of business and their willingness to sort of partner and actually get some outcomes and have mutual accountability, right? And that could happen to, again, like I said, the channel and co-sell tech partners. And so this is how we actually define stages here, right? So this is like a way we say, okay, this is a good way to say, okay, well, we've identified all the partners, but let's put them in different stages, right? Some of directional means that this is something that's like way out there on our partner roadmap. Developing means it's actually something that we have active business discussions, but are testing and trying to have a signed partnership to be incubated soon. Incubating means that actually we've done something there and actually testing it in the market, and active means it's actually working, right? It's actually something that's we're actively managing. This is actually a great framework, not just for partnership stakeholders, but also for the rest of the business stakeholders to understand, like, hey, where are we, right? Where are we in sort of the so-called pipeline of the partnerships that we're pursuing or want to pursue, right? So this is a good way to think about it. And then if you look at like the channel ecosystem, right? This is something that every company wants to look at, saying go from sell with to sell through, like I talked about. This could take like a long time for a company to actually put like this kind of a play into place. That's why starting from the left and having like a sell with expectation and then sequentially progressing to a sell through is what makes sense. And different types of the channel partners come into play, or categories come into play as you go from the sell with to the sell through model. And this is a good way to think about it, right? You want to go from somebody who's really boutique to start with, who will work with you on the sell with model. And if you get some good motions, then it starts into going into the distribution model, right? And ultimately what happens is that, like, I think the categories come down to these things, right? So this is a good way to then say, okay, if you've gone through the planning process, the stages of the pipeline of the partners, we can start to bucket them into these categories, so to speak, right? Like, okay, well, based on the outcome of the planning process, the pipeline, they fit in as a current channel partner or a current go-to-market technology partner or a current strategic alliance partner, right? So this is the ultimate way to categorize them. Hopefully that gives you a good sense of what we do here and what others can probably do.
Yeah, that's great. That was really good. Just a quick time check. I think we'll start taking questions here in the next 5 to 10 minutes. So feel free to start adding some questions in Q&A. We already have some questions that have come through. So let's talk a little bit around now you spend a lot of time prioritizing, actually identifying, or what we call as building that ideal partner profile, right? And that ideal partner profile is basically based on the gives and gets, that you have, and based on your organizational readiness and maturity of the partner organization, and sometimes the maturity of the target partner. You are starting to build a set of these prospective partnerships that you want to build, right? And you're based on what you said, hey, you're slotting them into these different categories, all the way from being directional, which is more long-term, when the company matures, we'll get there, to something which is active, where the go-to-market is actually happening right now, right? So I'm guessing, you're ready to hit the ground running. You're starting to generate results from some of these go-to-market activities, or at least, your sales team is super enthused to really start, hitting the market with this new partnership, right? But what, again, I always say that it's hard when the rubber meets the road. That's the hardest part of partnerships. And making announcements is the easier part. Signing agreements, even though not the easier part, is still okay. But what operational processes and rigor do you put in place to make sure that a partnership which essentially had a lot of promise is actually delivering on the promise, or maybe exceeding on the promises, right? How do you do that?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things there, right? So I feel like, the first thing that this is, again, the thing that we believe all of us in the partner ecosystem as partnership stakeholders have missed or not had is having a first-class citizen or an asset or a tool to even get to kind of do all of these things, right? Like the day-to-day jobs, or even building the outcomes and evaluating partnerships and constantly assessing the value of a partnership and exposing it to the other stakeholders. So there's a bunch of processes that come to mind, right? That start from, okay, well, what is the potential? What is a TAM, or the potential, a target addressable market for the outcome of a partnership, right? And that begins, if you think of it, right, from the account mapping of well, what is greenfield, what is brownfield between the companies. Again, there's some tools out there that are tactically doing only account mapping, right? Well, that's one part of the puzzle. Then what about the next part, right? What about the next part in terms of, well, if that's a checkbox, then how do you then even start to put together any kind of a framework of agreement between us? And then the next part, which is well, if you run a co-sell or a co-marketing campaign, how do you track that? How do you actually show value, constantly saying, hey, we just didn't launch the partnership. There's actually something that's coming out of it, which can connect to our respective CRM systems or marketing automation systems, and have a preview, right? Because ultimately, the real answer to this question is that you want to have micro wins. You want to have micro wins, and you want to show that, right, to the rest of the org to make sure that the partnership is actually getting an outcome. And that is the biggest gap that I believe we've had in the lives that we lead as partnership stakeholders. And there needs to be a single place to do that and pull all of this information. And then if that works, right, then it actually provides a lot of evidence, right, for other people to lean in and start to pay attention, whether there are gaps in the product integration, whether there's gaps in co-selling, or whether it's convincing the other company to say, hey, you know what, this is actually a good taste of what could come in terms of the outcomes if we lean in more and pay more attention and foster this partnership, right? So yeah, there's a whole bunch of orchestration that could be done. You folks at Pronto are beginning to do that, right? Where you're offering a platform. So um, I wish there was a platform like this, like 5-10 years ago, right? Where this is something that uh, could be the beginning, and not just like come in and put a band-aid on a partnership, right? It's like this is, if you start to approach partnerships and expose all these elements within the platform, it actually then fosters the education as well, to like saying, hey, these are the different stages of the life cycle of the partnership that you need to think about to even get organized yourself, even if you are pretty young in your career running partnerships, or for somebody who's really experienced, right? It meets kind of both the needs. So that's really what I believe is the right way to fill the gap, so to speak.
Thanks for mentioning Pronto, Shreyas, as a shameless plug and as a founder and CEO of Pronto. Yes. So as much as I wish 10 years ago something like Pronto would have existed, I'm actually glad it didn't exist, because otherwise Pronto wouldn't exist today. So, but no, seriously, I think one of the interesting things that we have seen sort of the market transform, especially over the past, I would say last 2 years, have been very, very critical, is how important BD and partnerships have become in most organizations. And most importantly, the sort of proactive and programmatic way of managing partnerships and giving it the attention to detail, I think that has really transformed in the last 2 years. And that's obviously where Pronto comes into place, right? If you're an organization who is really struggling with more of the programmatic approach and like really making that rubber meet the road and measuring it, I think that's where Pronto comes into place, right? Now, I think I'm going to switch gears a little bit, but because you talked about the planning process initially, right? How does a company like go through a planning process and a prioritization of setting up the right types of these partnerships? Because it's very easy for it to become qualitative. And I think that's actually one of the questions that we had actually gotten right now. Like, how do you make some of this planning and prioritization process more quantitative, rational, metrics and evidence driven than, sort of putting a finger on a brand and saying that, hey, that's a great brand, let's go build a partnership?
Yeah, I saw that question come in, and I was like, "This is amazing." It's a great segue and a plug to what we've worked on as a nice resource guide, right? That we can provide to the participants. And the best way to think, the answer is it's both. I would say qualitative and quantitative, right? It's neither one of the two. It's like saying, well, it's subjective and objective, right? It is qualitative from the perspective of like, if the gap is that, hey, you need more brand recognition, you want to hitch your wagon to the engine of a bigger, longer train, then yes, then I think that is qualitative and subjective, right? It cannot be measured, because you can't measure impressions and brand awareness. It's like it's hard enough to do as a company yourself, let alone do it from a co-marketing partnership, right? And then the quantitative aspect of it is, I would say, like, as you evaluate your partnership, this whole ideal partner profile concept, right? We put a lot of parameters to define what is an ideal partner profile. What is the number of customers that this organization has? Oh, by the way, which segment is it in? Is it a small, medium, or mid-size, or large enterprise segment? And then how much revenue does that does that partner have, right? And then what are our gaps, right? And then what is our outcome? Like, how many sales reps, how many SEs, right? And it all depends on what you're looking to get out of it, right? Are you looking to do an efficient mapping between two equal sized sales organizations, or are you looking to kind of purposely have the opposite, saying, no, we have a small limited team of sales and SE reps. Our goal is to enable that and broadcast that to a greater amount of a field sales team. And so this is really what comes into the whole like description of the ideal partner profile and the evaluation and the planning process. And we've put that together in a nice resource kit for the folks who are thinking about this. And I would say like that's a good way to think about like using that as a framework, so to speak, because we use that here in our company, but something that we believe that every company should probably look at, right? Going through and quantifying and qualifying which partners. But there's definitely a qualitative aspect to that as well, based on like how many do you want to have as partners? What is the goal of your company to have? Because every company has a goal of saying, hey, we want to have a robust set of, a roster of companies that we want to display on our website just to show the maturity of our company. That may or may not be the goal, right? So it all depends on what you want to do.
Got it. Got it. That's helpful. And to the audience here, the resource kit that Shreyas is talking about is something that we are gonna email to all the registrants who have attended the webinar today. Actually, to registrants of the webinar, this is, I mean, it's honestly speaking, when we were building it, I actually felt like, about 5-6 years ago, I wish I had a resource kit like this. It could have made my life so much easier. So, it's actually a way to start all the way from how do you think about building your ideal partner profile to the step of really starting to onboarding your partners, right? What are some of the series of steps that you need to do? And it actually takes more quantitative approach to prioritizing and segmenting and classifying these partners. And this will be in your inbox within the next 24 to 48 hours. So, Shreyas, so I know we are getting very quickly to the top of the hour here. I want to sort of quickly wrap up with sort of some of the takeaways, at least I had, that I learned today. The first thing that I really like, Shreyas, is this word called micro wins. I really like that word. That's the first time that I've actually heard of it. So thanks for making me learn something new today. So for me, my takeaways from Shreyas, what you said, and I would love to hear if there are any key takeaways from you, and then we'll quickly jump into questions, is first is, generate value to the end customer. That is your topmost priority, right? And whatever partnership or integration or alliance that you build, what is that value? Let's be very clear and make sure that value is being delivered, right? Number two is sort of the crawl, walk, run, or start small and expand, or what you said is get those micro wins first, and then scale those micro wins and market them to get bigger wins and expand that relationship, right? And the third one, which while it is just so purely evident, it's actually something that I think all of us miss, is go to your partner conferences, right? Go to the conferences of the partners. If possible, take customers or prospects with you to introduce them to the partner, and that gives the interest, right? So those are some of the key takeaways that I have, but I'm sure, Shreyas, anything that you want to add to that for our audience?
I think those are amazing. That's a good summary, right? It's always interesting to kind of get a mirror and a reflection of like what the other person grasps. So I'm glad that that's what you captured. I would say like there's one thing around executive stakeholders, right? To have, if the partnership function or charter is important, then it needs to be elevated to the C-suite level or to the SVP level, to have that level of attention, right? Because none of this would happen without that, right? Otherwise, it's looked at as the very tactical objective for the company, and so that's where it also starts from. So that's the takeaway that I've had from my years of experience of like being in companies or choosing companies to be in to run such a role. But that basically then talks about the importance that the company lays on the whole charter of partnerships.
Got it. Thank you, Shreyas. So let's quickly jump into some of the audience questions that we have been receiving, and I actually love some of these questions. So I'm gonna shoot them out, Shreyas. You're in the hot seat right now. One of the questions that came to is, look, typical reps from the partner standpoint, right? They are mostly interested in sort of, hey, can you give me a referral, or can you resell my product, sort of a thing, right? And if you want to ask them to build an integration or ask them to change something associated with the product so that the integration could be easier or the value delivered could be much more, right? It's definitely not in their wheelhouse, right? So you can't go higher up. Your existing connections are definitely not able to move the needle in the right direction, and they are looking at what can I get from the other side, but they're not willing to give anything, and this happens more often than not, right? So how do you deal with this challenge?
Yeah, a great question and a great insight as well by the audience member who actually is able to kind of grasp that and also like have that as an obstacle to be like called out, right? There's two ways to sort of solve it, I would say. Like the first part is like I would say what I just mentioned in terms of having the partnership leader at either company to have us like role at the seat at the executive table, the executive leadership team, right? Because that's a great way to approach it if you're the source company or you are the destination company based on who you want to partner with, right? But you can't solve that until that's actually a thing that's done, right? So the second way to solve that is appeal to the product organization of the other company, right? Um, Again, that could happen in two ways, right? Either you have, as a partnership manager, have the skill to talk product and talk integration value, and you appeal and then sort of enroll the product manager or the product leader of the other company, or you have some champion in terms of having systems engineering, solutions engineering leadership or buy-in from the other company or from your company to again have a mind meld between the solution engineering teams of both those companies, and then they can act as a champion or as a step function to reach the product manager or a product leader. Or sometimes you could have the kind of wherewithal to socially network yourself to the product leader in the org. It could be a chief product officer. And yes, it sometimes these things that I'm mentioning are above the pay grades or the ranks of those people in those roles. But that's why you have to start to work your way up through systems engineering, solutions engineering, SE leaderships, SE managers, and start small to go reach the product managers. And then if the product managers get it, why I say that is because then that creates that aha light bulb moment. Because back to the first box that I showed in the gives and gets of the partnerships, right? That's where it starts, right? If there's recognition and like awareness that okay, this has value to solve product gaps, then that just basically changes the whole game in terms of the partnership potential.
Got it. That makes sense. So the other question that came in, and I definitely want to take a couple more questions here. I have had this challenge, Shreyas, but maybe you know this, which is, are there any good books or materials from a reader standpoint on partnerships, especially to strengthen the knowledge about this? I feel like I know the answer, but I wanna hear it from you.
Oh, well, yeah, like, this is interesting. I feel this. I've felt this need for a long time, and it's. I've joked with a few of my buddies in the partner ecosystem, saying, "Hey, we got to write a book. We got to write a book. We got to write a book." And so I feel like that's hopefully sometime. Again, nobody's written that book, right? About hey, how do you like build partnerships and get the outcome of partnerships. It's all these sort of pockets of places. I think you guys at Pronto have done something in terms of writing some playbooks. I would look to some of your ebooks. Again, selfish plug, but I really feel like I've gotten value of creating awareness out of that. But in terms of a book that has always inspired me to, again, back to these obstacles, to overcome these obstacles, Blue Ocean Strategy. That's one of my favorite books, right? So the Blue Ocean Strategy is basically clearly defines what your company is going through in terms of your business strategy, and then how to like fill the gaps and go into blue oceans. And those blue oceans could come organically as a part of like what you're doing as a company, but also inorganically through a partnership. That's one of my favorite books.
Got it. And for the audience, and again, I think there's no mincing words here. I think we have had a dearth of really good learning content or learning material when it comes to partnerships, and especially as partnerships become more and more complex in the world of consumption business models, right? At Pronto, we are working on something. Unfortunately, my lips are sealed. So we're working on something in this area. It'll probably take us another quarter to release it, but we'll do that. But for anyone who would want to get some interesting links from some of the companies where we have actually collated really good content, feel free to reach out to us, Parker or myself. It's just our first name at gopronto.io, and we are happy to share some of those links. So Shreyas, there's actually a couple of interesting questions, and we only have 2 minutes before we wrap up, but I'll ask you one last question, which I really feel is going to be extremely interesting. And I've seen this happen personally, which is, how do you, like, there are times where your partner will start potentially taking the shape of a competitor, either because they have acquired someone or either they are trying to build something in-house. So, and that's a very, very tricky situation to be in. So how do you prevent or sniff situations where partners actually start to take shape of a competitor?
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, I feel like for those of us who have thrived in this technology and product based partnerships world, that is a big thing that you always have to be very, very mindful of, right? Especially as if you're a smaller vendor and you're trying to like go around and find the sun of the universe in the center of the universe, and then say, hey, you want to like be a planet around that ecosystem. It's hard, right? It's like, I think the best analogy that I can derive is like this Greek mythology, like Icarus, right? He you want to basically avoid being the Icarus, right? You have wings that you've built with a lot of wax. You don't want to go fly too close to the sun, right? And you don't want to go too close to the ocean. You have to be somewhere in between of find the right altitude, right? What I mean by that is like, well, like you have to be cognizant of how much altitude you're picking up and make sure that you're not exposing too much product information to a competitor. The good best practices there is always have NDAs, always be vigilant of every conversation. The biggest thing I would say is the learnings, right? Learn from every interaction, and basically use that to your advantage into the next interaction that you want to have with the company. We had a great example of one of those partnerships that actually led to that vendor being a competitor. And a biggest learning experience for us as a company was that it actually gave us sort of an unfair advantage of the view of how does this company actually release products, how does their sales org function. And then because we had deep knowledge of the integration in their product suite, we actually got to understand what their actual gaps are, what is their actual architecture. And that informed us to have a better compete strategy, which has actually been helping us to say, okay, here's the gaps, and we know this, and we can say this with authority because we know that from our partnership days, right? And so, yeah, that learning can be invaluable, right? It's one way to look at it negatively, but it actually adds a lot of value for a compete strategy.
Got it. That's an amazing example, and no wonder why I jam with you quite a bit. It actually makes me think, like, I'm very curious to know what that company is, but yes, I know you can't share that information, so thank you. Now, this has been great, Shreyas. Thank you so much for taking time, and most importantly, thank you for the audience for taking time and joining for the SaaS Connect one-on-one. Do not forget to register for the upcoming SaaS Connect one-on-one conference on the 27th of April. And feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And if you believe either Shreyas or I, either whether we can help you individually or through our companies, definitely reach out to us. And once again, Shreyas, thank you so much. And thank you to the audience. Shreyas, any closing notes from your end?
The same thing. I want to say thank you to the audience. I saw a lot of interesting comments and questions. And so, yes, these are our email IDs. If you want to talk to Swaroop or myself, they're right here. I hope that it was a worthwhile use of an hour of your day, and it inspires you to succeed better in conducting your day-to-day jobs of running partnerships. And thank you for having me here, Swaroop.
It was our pleasure, sir. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you at the SaaS Connect one-on-one, where I definitely am going to be there, and hopefully Shreyas is going to be there as well. Would love to meet you all in person. Thank you, guys. Signing off.
Bye.